So without further ado, folks, I want to introduce our guest back from the Heritage Foundation, Ariel Cohen. Ariel, thank you so much for joining us again on the Final Say Radio Show.
It's always a pleasure.
Well, first, happy Thanksgiving. I hope you had a couple of days off, a nice, enjoyable time with family.
Yes, indeed. We had a wonderful Thanksgiving.
Oh, excellent. Well, that being said, let's get to the unfortunate business, and that is what's transpiring right now in the Middle East. We know that we had I think it was about a 7 or 8 day engagement between Israel and Gaza. Israel responding, of course, to the constant barrage of missiles coming into its nation, and the barrage had just increased to the point where Israel felt they had to respond. But then we saw what was very troubling to me, and that was this sort of peace accord that was, aided with the help of Morsi and Egypt, and a lot of, I think, persuasion by the world arena for Israel to stop their engagement in Gaza. And I think it's troubling to me because I feel like it's just a break from the action, a rearming of more missiles into Gaza. And actually, I think what was accomplished was the strengthening of terrorist regimes and terrorist action because they were rewarded for their actions.
What happened was that at some point, Israel got a window of about a week. But at some point, the pressure from the Arab countries against Israel, indirect pressure because, of course, they don't have diplomatic relations with the exception of Egypt and Jordan. The pressure was on Israel to stop the bombardment of Gaza, and to a certain extent, pressure on Hamas to stop the rocket fire into Israel. And it was accomplished through the intercourse between the Arab countries with the European community members and with the United States. You noticed that President Obama used to say during that time that Israel has a right of self-defense. Of course, it does. It has it under the UN charter. But at the same time, he was calling for Israel not to escalate. And frankly, a lot of Israelis didn't think that the lives of their children, of their sons and daughters, were worth a ground invasion of Gaza, in which, of course, Israel would have lost at least some lives, as it did in 2009 in Operation Cast Lead, when 13 Israeli soldiers died in Gaza. But what Israel did not accomplish, and what Israeli allies, such as the United States, did not accomplish, was disarming of Hamas, or even kicking Hamas out of Gaza, because Hamas is an extremist, religious, fanatical dictatorship. Let's call a spade a shovel here. And now Hamas has a strong master in Egypt, President Morsi, who immediately, after the plaudits and the laurels that the Obama administration heaped on him, on Morsi, after the ceasefire, proclaimed himself above the law and said that no judiciary review will apply to his decrees. This is an usurpation, the seizure of power, of which there is no precedent in Egypt and in the Middle East.
I have a question for you with that particular issue. Is that Morsi going out of his way to almost put egg in the president's face, or was that unintended?
The first thing I believe happened was that Morsi, who is not a very experienced foreign policy operator, thought that this praise from Hillary Clinton, who was on the ground there with him, and from President Obama in the White House, gave him immunity from American criticism, gave him a green light, and by the way, so that our listeners remember, the U.S. facilitated a huge $4.8 billion loan from the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, in which the U.S. is playing the first fiddle. Moreover, the direct support of Egypt includes $1.5 billion of military assistance. So do the math. 4.8 plus 1.5 is what? 6.3, right? A chunk of change in the country that is impoverished, that destroyed its own tourism industry, which was the big currency earner for Egypt, a country where a lot of people go to bed hungry, and a lot of people now realize that the so-called Arab Spring, what I call the Arab chaos, did not put the bread on their tables.
Yeah, there's one other thing that was very interesting, in fact, throughout this whole last week and a half to 2 weeks, and that is not just Iran, but it seemed to me that all of the players in that region had very openly admitted that there were indeed weapons coming from Iran through various places into Hamas and into the hands of these operators. It was openly admitting to this. And then the other observation here is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that we're about to put troops now on the ground in the Sinai, which is, well, very interesting for the fact that here we are saying we got to get troops out of Iraq, we have to get the troops out of Afghanistan, but now we're going to put them right in the middle of this.
No, let's start with the last point. There are American troops in Sinai, several hundred of them, not a lot of them, since Israel and Egypt signed the Camp David Accords. These troops are in the Sinai Peninsula, which is between Israel and Egypt, now for 3 decades. So there's nothing new here. It's not a new deployment. We may be rotating them. But what bothers me is that, the U.S. was supporting financially Hosni Mubarak's regime, which was not the greatest Democrat in the world, but that was a staunch friend and ally of the United States in the fight against terrorism, in sustaining its very cold peace, but peace with Israel. And now we are in the era of uncertainty in which President Morsi of Egypt blows hot and cold on this peace treaty. They said, we support it, but we need to revise it. We need more troops in Sinai because we allowed Al-Qaeda to grow there in Sinai, on the border of Israel and inside Egypt that, by the way, threatened Egyptian chicken that was laying the golden eggs, tourism. Several Egyptian hotels were attacked by Al-Qaeda affiliated terrorists in Sinai. And yes, Egypt allowed smuggling of weapons, including missiles that were Iranian-produced or Sudan-produced, but they were destined for Gaza, for Hamas in Gaza, to fire at Israel. And let's not forget, Hamas is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, the same Muslim Brotherhood that is now ruling Egypt, that is now fighting in Syria, that is now de facto ruling Tunis, and is very influential in Libya. These are the results of the Obama Middle East policy that facilitated the Islamists to come to power and to upset American interests and threaten directly the survival of the State of Israel.
Yes, Ariel, I'm glad you brought that up, because one of my biggest concerns about this whole, what I'll call artificial ending, or yet another cycle where we pretend there's a cure to the Gaza crisis or Palestinian crisis in general until you have an absolute military defeat, as we've seen in past history like World War II, where sans that you're not actually going to have an opportunity to truly rebuild and start anew and build new relationships. But it feels to me like what the president ultimately was doing in some regards is by propping up Morsi as somehow the great statesman and putting him in a negotiating position, actually elevating him above Israel, which is ironic because, as you pointed out, the Muslim Brotherhood was behind Hamas and has been supporting and helping Hamas pass weapons for quite some time. But in doing so, wasn't President Obama to a large extent helping to protect his legacy by showing, see, look, they're working with us against Iran, and they're actually helping to quell terrorism. And then on the flip side, it seemed like Morsi then turned around and played Obama as if to say, well, I'm smart enough. He said he may not be a very experienced statesman, but it seemed like he was smart enough to then play Obama as to say, well, since you need me to look good, now is the perfect time for me to take advantage and do this power grab, because you're not going to want to eat your own words only days after you serve them up hot and in a very public manner.
You're absolutely right. President Obama feels very comfortable with what by sort of a long stretch is moderate, quote-unquote, Islamists, and I stress quote-unquote. For example, he is very good buddies with Prime Minister Mehmet Recep Erdogan. I guess I got the first name right. Recep Erdogan of Turkey. Recep Erdogan is an Islamist. He is extremely anti-Israel. He's also personally anti-Semitic. Obama is definitely talking up Morsi, and he views the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood as some kind of a success in the Middle East. It is not a success. The Muslim Brotherhood is a transnational, radical, extremist organization, and enough to look at its charter on its website, where it says our path is a path of jihad, and our highest reward is the death in the name of Allah in the path of jihad, and our law is the Quran. This is an extremist creed. They are not in favor of the rule of law in our understanding of the word, yours and mine. And it's not accidental that one of the first things in the power grab that Morsi did, first, he removed the secular military in Egypt, and now he's removing the judiciary. Why? Because the judiciary in Egypt, as illiberal as it may be, is still sort of secular and sort of non-Islamist. It is a product of 60 years of nationalist, in some cases socialist, regime under President Gamal Abdel Nasser, and then Anwar Sadat, and then Mubarak, but it's not Islamist. For Islamists, there is no secular law, because the Sharia law, the religious law based on the Quran, on the Hadith, on the life of Prophet Muhammad, etc., this is the supreme law that the secular law cannot compete with, and Morsi and Muslim Brotherhood are saying we want to build a Sharia state in Egypt. And this is extremely dangerous because Egypt is the leading Arab state and one of the leading Muslim states in the world.
Agreed, and our president, I think, has been submissive and capitulating from day one. Quick question for you, Ariel, is it feels to me like Hamas wins either way, though, because Hamas, do they not have both Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, using them as a tool?
Well, it's very interesting, and I'm glad you asked this question, because a lot of people were trying to say that Hamas is switching now masters, that they're switching from Syria. They evacuated its leadership from Syria to Cairo. We saw Khalid Mashal, the chairman of their Politburo, believe it or not, they call it Politburo like in the Soviet Union. He is based out of Cairo now, but in reality what you see is Iran shipping missiles to Sudan, and then these missiles are being trucked across Sudan into Egypt and then smuggled into Sinai and across the red lines into Gaza and then through the underlying what do you call it? Through the tunnels. So you have Hamas actually as a cow that is sucking on two teats. The Sunni traditional Muslim Brotherhood masters, also the Salafis, even more radical Muslims from Qatar. you just saw that 2 or 3 weeks before this war started by Hamas, before they escalated the missile attacks on Israel, the Emir of Qatar, the man who is multi-billionaire, who is sitting on probably the second or third largest supply of gas in the world, who is selling liquid natural gas to the Europeans, to the Chinese, to Asia, and as a result earns, for a population of 200,000 people, he earns tens of billions of dollars a year. So Emir went and visited Gaza. The foreign minister of Turkey, another Sunni power, came and visited Gaza now, and at the same time the Iranian weapons are coming in. So this is a unique situation in which the Sunnis and the Shia, who are fighting all across the Middle East, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Iraq, now are united together against Israel and are supporting Israel's implacable enemy that doesn't recognize the right of Israel to exist, that wants to destroy the Jewish people, and they're not making any bones about it. It is on their websites. It is in their charter. And these are people that the only others that I can compare them with are the Nazis. It's just they don't have the means and the occupation that the Nazis had in Europe in the 1940s to destroy the Jews.
I completely agree with what you just said there. Now, Ariel, how does this play out, the actions of Hamas and what they've gained here, and the Palestinians seeking a bid with the UN for statehood?
Well, this is the most disturbing and fantastic aspect of this, because on the one hand, when folks are talking about a Palestinian state as a solution to the Israel-Arab conflict, they forget that there are not one, but two Palestinian states de facto today. One is in the West Bank, called the Palestinian Autonomy under Mahmoud Abbas, nicknamed Nom de Guerre Abu Mazen, and the other one is in Gaza. One of them says that they're fighting Israel through diplomacy. The other one is fighting Israel with rockets. As a church lady would say on Saturday Night Live, how convenient. So you have separation of work. These guys are shooting, and the other guys are talking. I would add to this nightmare scenario one other aspect, and that is that the king of Jordan now is in a very, very shaky position. The blow by the Muslim Brotherhood, the same Muslim Brotherhood that took over Egypt, against the Jordanian dynasty, King Abdullah II, may come this winter, maybe spring, maybe summer, but it's coming. The majority of the population of Jordan, up to 70%, are Palestinians. So we may end up with not one, not two, but three Palestinian states, one in Jordan, one in the West Bank, and one in Gaza. And if this is not enough, now Mahmoud Abbas is going to the United Nations and wants recognition of the United Nations for a Palestinian state, quote unquote. And the United States, thank God for now, is standing with Israel, but not many others do. The Europeans, we don't know how they're going to vote. And it's going to the General Assembly where the United States does not have the veto power. Great Britain and France do not have the veto power. It's the General Assembly of countries you and I never heard about, like Tonga or Vanuatu, countries of 10,000 people. 22 or 23 Arab states, 56 Muslim states. So it doesn't look good for the only Jewish state there is, the State of Israel.
Do you have time for one more question?
Sure.
Okay. In looking at the whole scenario of how this is played out, because it seems like there's a lot of manipulation of states going on, is this really almost as if Iran is creating, or multiple states are creating a good distraction for Iran to continue on its nuclear program without the world focusing on it as great as they were?
I think that the Arab states, the Sunni Arab states that hate Iran, are just working at their own cross purposes, because you see the commitment that they demonstrate in Syria, where they're supporting the Syrian Sunni majority fighting the minority Alawite regime that is aligned with Iran and supported by Russia and China. On the other hand, where they are working against Israel, in supporting Hamas, they are hand in hand with Iran, because while the Sunni-Shia conflict may be deadly and deathly and bloody, when it comes to fighting Israel, it unites the Sunni extremists and the Shia extremists. But let's not forget that the long range of that whole activity, the real goal, is to fight the West, is to fight the United States, because if, God forbid, tomorrow Israel disappeared, guess what? They will not go home and rest. They will start the next round of jihad against Europe and against us.
That I completely agree with. Well, Ariel Cohen, I want to thank you so much for joining us again. Your expertise is always welcome here in the program, and I actually learned a few things from you today. So thanks again for joining us, and again, hope
My pleasure.
you had a nice Thanksgiving. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.